The motion picture The Martian, based on the best-selling novel by Andy Weir, tells the story of a remarkably resourceful U.S. astronaut. After being stranded on the red planet, he manages to survive by his wits, resourcefulness, and deep knowledge of technology. The Martian may be a terrific film, but it certainly isn't the first interesting Mars movie. I'm Glenn Zorpet, executive editor of IEEE Spectrum, and I recently spent 35 hours of my life rewatching movies about Mars. Here's my highly opinionated guide to the best and worst movies ever made about the red planet. Aelita, Queen of Mars, was not only one of the first Mars movies, it was also one of the first science fiction films. It's a Soviet production from 1924 in which an engineer travels to Mars, where he meets the title character and takes part in a workers' rebellion. What's interesting about the movie now are its sets and costumes. In early 20th century sci-fi movies, extraterrestrials often made daring fashion choices. That's how you knew they weren't Earthlings. Produced in 1930, the charmingly odd motion picture Just Imagine is set in 1980, when babies would come out of vending machines and numbers would replace names. Just Imagine is about a young man who goes to Mars with his best friend. The young lady in the flying car is Maureen O'Sullivan, who, 2 years later, would find superstardom as Jane in the movie Tarzan the Ape Man. The best thing about Just Imagine is this set, a 1930s vision of a typical big city in 1980. 200 people worked for 5 months to build the set in an airship hangar. There was a burst of Mars movies in the United States in the 1950s during what is known as the golden age of cinematic sci-fi. This scene is from the 1950 movie Rocketship XM with Lloyd Bridges and Osa Masson. One of the great pleasures of watching those movies today is seeing how directors envisioned a trip to Mars using World War II-era technology. Here's the flight deck of Rocketship XM. Notice all the analog dials and the clipboards hanging from the walls. The 1951 motion picture Flight to Mars is so bad that it's uproariously funny. It was also basically a recycled movie. It used the rocket sets from Rocketship XM and the spacesuits from Destination Moon. The space travelers in Flight to Mars are seen here encountering Martians for the first time. Oddly enough, the Martians must wear spacesuits on their own planet, while the Earthlings can stroll around in jumpsuits and leather football helmets. Red Planet Mars from 1952 is a tale of rival Cold War radio engineers, one of whom makes contact with a Martian civilization. It starts promisingly, but degenerates into extreme goofiness when it turns out that God is sending radio messages to Earth from Mars. So here's an idea for a sci-fi movie plot. Because of a mishap, a muscular, resourceful, and geeky U.S. astronaut finds himself stranded on Mars, where he must improvise brilliantly to feed and shelter himself. He survives calamitous mishaps and setbacks before undertaking a long and perilous journey to a rendezvous that could save his life and get him back to Earth. Sound familiar? It's not what you're thinking. 51 years before The Martian, there was a different Martian, and it was Paul Mantee in the movie Robinson Crusoe on Mars. Released in 1964, Crusoe has the distinction of being the first decent Mars movie. It had a brief cameo from Adam West, who would soon become TV's Batman, and it also featured a monkey called Mona, whose real name was Barney. Robbie the Robot, from the 1956 film Forbidden Planet, is clearly the best robot in movie history, but Amy, from the movie Red Planet, runs a close second. In this picture, released in 2000, Amy goes haywire shortly after landing on Mars and spends the whole film stalking and tormenting the surviving astronauts. Amazingly, Amy was just computer graphics. In 2001, John Carpenter had the bright idea of setting a horror movie on Mars. The result is Ghosts of Mars, which stars the former supermodel Natasha Henstridge as a police officer attempting to escort a prisoner. But it turns out that mining operations have somehow released the spirits of long-dead Martian warriors. These spirits take over the bodies of local workers and turn them into murderous zombies. Mayhem ensues. The picture is basically a rehash of older and much better John Carpenter movies, but it has a couple of entertaining moments. One occurs when one of the characters accidentally slices off his own thumb. Trust me, it's funny. Total Recall, released in 1990, is another Mars movie worth watching. Arnold Schwarzenegger plays a former counter-revolutionary who's had his memory erased and is trying to figure out who the bad guys are on Mars. Here, the bad guys are about to try to alter his mind. The movie, based on a story by Philip K. Dick, explores issues of memory and identity. Plus, it's got lots of impressively creative sleaze and violence, thanks to director Paul Verhoeven. It may be the second best Mars movie, and it's definitely worth watching. For those of you keeping track, that makes a total of 4 good Mars movies: Robinson Crusoe on Mars, Total Recall, Red Planet, and The Martian. Bad Mars movies predominate, but we think there'll be some more great ones in the near future. We Earthlings are perennially fascinated by Mars, and there's lots of great Martian literature out there just waiting for cinematic treatment. For IEEE Spectrum, I'm Glenn Zorpet.